Well, Dustin Poirier showed Benoit Saint-Denis last night that there are, in fact, levels to this game.
Yep.
And while it didn't come without Benoit having his moments, he certainly won that first round, and he showed me some things that make me have a lot of promise for this young man.
Oh, yeah.
At only 27 years old, he's only been training MMA since 2017, if you can believe that, which is just an insane statistic. But for a guy that you kind of picture as a title challenger within the next 12 to 18 months, when they have a setback, you kind of have to step back, regroup, and think about what's next. So I want to talk about, first and foremost, what can Benoit do to rectify some holes in his game and improve so that that doesn't happen to him again? And then who might be a decent next opponent for him to take on to where he can get back on the horse and keep moving forward?
Well, Benoit Saint-Denis took on a very risky opponent in Dustin Poirier. And a lot of people, even the odds makers were saying that Benoit was going to win this fight. He was a 2-1 favorite over a guy who's been in the top of the division for so long, Dustin Poirier. And then Dustin Poirier also took all of the risk and all the pressure by fighting a guy who's not even in the top 10. And if they would have, if the results would have been different, likely we would have seen Dustin Poirier out of the top 5 for the first time in years. I don't even know how long. And then we'd see a new character jump right into the top 5 in BSD, but that didn't happen. And look, BSD looked really good in the first round. And those guillotines that Dustin was throwing on him, they looked pretty legit. Like,
some of them were tight.
Yeah, you never want to see somebody jump guillotine. And he even made a joke about it. He's like, I'm still going to keep jumping guillotine. I don't care. And John Anik, the consummate professional, the GOAT, as far as being on the microphone, said that as far as my stats are concerned, and I'm pretty sure they're right, Dustin Poirier has never finished somebody by guillotine. So it's kind of funny that he's in this co-main event slot against this absolute killer who's came in as the favorite, and he's trying to jump guillotine not once, not twice, not 3 times, but tried it 4 times. And the first one happened, and I was like, okay, he's jumping it because Benoit's so in on a takedown that he's going to try to just threaten something, create some sort of a scramble. And that's exactly what he did. He actually made his way back up to his feet off of that. But then when he did it second and third time and he was actually being held down on the ground, I was like, oh, I don't know if he needs to keep doing that. Maybe this is not the game plan we needed to see. And it looked like he was showing his cards to Benoit. It's like, okay, we found out there's a hole in your game, and when you shoot in, you leave your head on the outside. We're going to try to guillotine you. But while he was very close, apparently, at getting Khabib in a guillotine choke, BSD made it look pretty easy the way he was getting out of those time and time again. And that's why I think BSD has such a bright future. And I think if Dustin Poirier is not able to win in the first round against BSD, I think all these guys that seem like the next right opponent for BSD are going to have a hell of a time, especially if he doesn't have to train for 5 rounds and if he gets to go in there for 3. If you get him in there with a Rafael Fiziev, or if you get him in there with, a Jalen Turn or somebody like that, of course these are hard fights and styles make matchups, but I think BSD has a pretty good shot at staying relevant and potentially not losing any stock even though he lost to Dustin Poirier. I know you want to get your hand raised, and usually when you lose a fight, you go and fight another guy that's coming off a loss, and when you win a fight, you fight a guy that's coming off a win. But I think BSD's next opponent will be somebody ranked higher than him once again. And I think you got to look around maybe 6 through 10, and that's kind of the sweet spot for him. And that's why I'd love to see him in there with maybe a Jalen Turner or a Rafael Fiziev. And I know timing's different for all of these guys, and some of them at the top of 155 already have dance partners, and so there's going to be a little bit of slim pickings for BSD. But right now, BSD's as hot as it comes, and even coming off a loss, I think the stock is still going to go up in BSD. People realize that if he can beat Dustin Poirier pretty handedly in the first round of the fight, that he's a very promising prospect.
Yeah, certainly he is exactly that. And a couple of things I think that he could do to improve his game. One, he does have a very wide stance. And I get that that is, the stance that he prefers to fight out of, but it does make him a little bit stagnant. And then especially when he starts getting up to the top of 155, you get those great grapplers like Islam Makhachev, Arman Sarukian, and they can expose that for the takedown. So I think
strikers, because of the leg kicks. He was getting Dustin landed a beautiful leg kick right at the beginning of the fight, and it's because BSD was so heavy in the front leg.
Exactly right. That, and I think he opens himself up a little bit too much with his combinations. I don't think he was afraid at all of being knocked out, and sometimes it takes being knocked out to actually respect and fear the knockout.
Yep.
And I think that'll actually be a good thing for BSD moving forward. Looking schedule-wise at who he could fight next, he's probably going to need to take, it will probably be about 5 to 6 months before we see him back in the octagon competing again. And they just announced last night that Renato Moicano is going to be taking on Jalen Turner at UFC 300. Side note, that's an awesome fight. Cannot wait for that fight. But I know they usually put losers versus losers and winners versus winners, but losing to the number 3 guy when you're at number 12, I don't expect BSD to fall too far. If he falls back 1 or 2 positions, that would set the winner of Jalen versus Moicano at about 3 to 4 ranking slots ahead of Benoit Saint-Denis. So that would be a great fight, great stylistic matchup. I think that would be a striking affair of the highest order. You mentioned Rafael Fiziev. I think that's another great one. Somebody else who said they want to win 3 fights and go on a title run, though it's unlikely, but I'm a huge fan of him, is Bobby Green. Somebody like that. Unbelievably crisp boxing, very elusive, very hard to find, especially with that wide stance of Benoit moving a little bit slower. I think it would be very challenging, and we'd see if he can really go after and land big shots on an elusive fighter. And then you have Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's looking to come back. He's a great striker in his own right. I think that would be a fun matchup. So those are kind of my 4 directions if I'm the matchmaker that I'm going to go with Benoit. I think the Jalen Turner versus Moicano winner makes the most sense because timing-wise and stylistically, that would be something that would move Benoit up just 1 level. He's not going all the way to the top 5 again. Right. We already did that experiment, and we saw how that goes as of right now. So I think somebody, as you said, from 6 to 10, and that would likely be the winner of Turner versus Moicano.
Yeah, well, how about that? And I love that fight, and I hope Moicano, I like Jalen Turner, so win-win, regardless of who gets their hand raised in that. But if Moicano gets on the microphone, it's going to be gold. It's going to go viral. And I think Jalen Turner could be a future champion. I think Jalen Turner has the body type to not only be a big problem at 55 for as long as he's there, but when he moves up to 70, he's going to fill that frame out and look like an absolute monster. If you tell me 3 years from now, when Michael Venom Page is about 38, 39 years old, and Jalen Turner has decided he's going to move into 170, you tell me those 2 guys are going to fight, I'm all in it. Jalen Turner has all the skills to not only be a champ at 55, but potentially be a champ at 170. Future's very bright for him. But I'm going to throw something at you. So last night, I'm not a stickler for the rankings, but I do try to keep an eye on them, especially after the day after a fight. I can remember pretty well. I've got a photographic memory. I can remember the last name and then the number next to it. Rafael dos Anjos was number 11, and BSD was number 12. And both of them stubbed their toe last night. Both of them lost. And I could actually see a scenario with BSD moving up in the rankings even off of a loss, because RDA also lost, and he lost to somebody that's not quite as decorated or far into the rankings as Dustin Poirier. Right. So you lose to number 6 in Matus Gamrot, and you're number 11, you might slide a little bit. And now if you're number 12 and you lost to number 3, you might wind up stealing that 11 spot. So crazier things have happened, and I'm not really, like I said, I'm not a stickler for the rankings, but that seems like the kind of fight that the UFC might look at as well. RDA versus BSD. They both are known
3-name acronyms.
Exactly.
Or 3-letter acronyms.
3-letter acronyms. I could see that being something, a good bump up in competition. You're talking about a former world champion in RDA, and RDA needs some high profile fights. And look, BSD was just in the co-main event of what I'm considering the best UFC event I've ever watched personally. 299 was electric from start to finish. The card, the matchmaking, everything about it was perfect. And BSD was the fourth guy to walk out, the fourth to last guy to walk out, while RDA, a former world champion in that very division,
was on the prelims.
Exactly. So I think there's some enticing aspects for RDA to take that fight, and of course BSD, the young hungry lion that he is going to want to get one back, but also do it in a high profile fight again. They realize he's a star in the making at least, and fighting a former champion, really getting to test yourself against somebody who was the best in the world at one point and is still very much an elite of the elite fighters. That would be a perfect fight for me. I don't know. They fought on the same night, so I think timing-wise it'll end up working out for them. And I don't know. Crazy things happen. I don't know. I could just see RDA versus BSD being a great fight, potentially still being for 5 rounds, and then doing it for a main event fight night. But either way, BSD's future is bright. I really am excited to see what he does. And win, lose, or draw, I'm in on the experience. And I love that Dana White went away from what boxing does. He's not worried about everybody maintaining that O. An undefeated record's beautiful. There's some great fighters in the UFC right now with undefeated records, but we don't have to hang our hat on that. And there's dudes like BSD that even though they lost their fight, they didn't get their hand raised against the number 3 guy in the world, his stock is still rising, and I think he has a very bright future at lightweight.
As do I.